And hello everyone. Today, May 19th, 2025, is the 50th anniversary of Elton John and Bernie Taupin's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. It was released on Monday, May 19th, 1975 in the US and Canada, and then a few days later in the UK on Saturday, May 24th. 50 years later, it's Monday, May 19th, 2025. Today in Canada is Victoria Day, so that's why I'm not at work today. I wanted to take advantage of the fact that it's a holiday, I'm at home, and I'm making this video. For those of you who may not know, although I'd imagine if you're watching a video about a vinyl deep dive about the album, you probably already know what the album is. It's Elton and Bernie's autobiographical album. It tells the story of how they met and their early years working together as songwriters up until about the point, I think, around 1970, just after actually Elton did Empty Sky. And the songs for the album were written in 1974, and they were recorded in late 1974 at the Caribou Ranch Studios in Colorado. This is the second album of Elton's, what I call Elton's Caribou trilogy. So Caribou, Captain Fantastic, and the Rock of the Westies album. The album was actually remixed at Marquee Studios in London, the United Kingdom, in early April 1975. So second album of Elton's Caribou trilogy, and the last album that he did with his Classic Years band, his Classic Years band being, of course, with Nigel Olsson on drums, Dean Murray on bass. Elton's sort of Classic Years band would not reunite again, at least in the studio, for a full album until 1983. Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy was the first album in history to debut at the #1 spot on the US Billboard Hot 100 Albums chart. Captain Fantastic is my second favorite Elton John album of all time. That's just before Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which is in the #1 position, and just after The Fox, which is in at #3. So what I'm going to do in this episode is I'm going to go through all of my vinyl copies. I have 18 copies, but don't worry, there are some doubles in there, so it's not going to be, 18 segments of me holding up copies of things. And I'm just going to talk about them and talk about their origins, where they're from, what labels they were on, that sort of thing, and also talk about their sound quality. And so this is the vinyl deep dive. And after I'm finished recording this, I'm going to do a CD deep dive, and I'll finish the CD deep dive for Captain Fantastic later this week. Well, let's begin by talking about my first copy, and here it is here. I remember I got it Saturday, June 24th, 1989, at the Music World in Cornwall, Ontario, which is where I lived at the time. I was 8 years old. I was 8 years old at the time. I was huge into Elton. He was my golden god, my hero, my idol, and I'd purchased a number of his albums up to that point, but I had never heard anything from Captain Fantastic. This is an MCA Canada cassette, catalog number MCAC-37066. It was mastered with Dolby HX Pro, hence the little disclaimer there. It says new improved sound quality. As a kid, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that this would not sound as scratchy and as beat up as my parents' LP copy, and that's a point worth noting. My parents had a copy. It was actually my mother's copy. She bought it when she was in college, way back in '75 when the album came out, but she'd played the heck out of it so much, and on turntables that weren't always so great, that it had been really cut up and had a lot of gashes and skips on it. And my parents never ever controlled what I could or could not listen to in terms of music, but my parents, my father especially, said, "Matt, please, you cannot play that Captain Fantastic record on our turntable. It's going to ruin the precious stylus." So I never got to hear the vinyl copy, but I had a vinyl copy with 2 booklets and the poster and everything. So though I was playing this, I had the full album experience from the very beginning, and that was June 24th, 1989. Let's get into the vinyl. So this first one is, well, I got to take them out of the sleeves anyway. So this is a 1975 UK first series UK DJM, catalog number DJLPX1, and it was pressed by Pi Records, which was at that time still DJM's distributor in the UK. I got this copy in 2020. I think it's the one that I got 2020 from a Discogs seller in, probably mispronouncing this, Hertfordshire, UK. It's just north of London. That's actually just a few minutes from Nebworth. But it's a UK copy, got from a UK seller, and it has the 2 booklets in it. I'm guessing you've probably seen the booklets and the poster if you're watching a video like this. But in case you haven't, the original Captain Fantastic came with a lyrics booklet, illustrated lyrics booklet, a scrapbook with personal photos from Elton and Bernie's archives, and a poster, which was the front and back of the album cover. And so this copy does come with those, and it's the sleeve was printed by Shorewood Packaging in the UK, and the LP was, as I said earlier, pressed by Pi Records, which was UK's distributor. We know that because of the catalog number. It's an original, so it's a first series DJM, UK DJM catalog number, and it has the Pi pressing ring, and also if you hold it up to a strong light, it will glow a translucent deep rose. The lacquers were cut by Aaron Chakravarty at CBS Studios UK. In the past, Pi Records, actually Pi Studios, had cut all the lacquers for Elton's original UK DJM pressings, but in this case, the lacquers were cut by Aaron Chakravarty at CBS UK. The lacquer numbers are respectively A1, B1, so that's the earliest pair of lacquer, or they're really lacquer numbers, not stamper numbers, but some people refer to them as stamper numbers. That's the earliest combo you can get for this. And the sound quality, I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10, which is excellent on my 10-point scale. The low end is warm and rich. The high end is sweet and clear, lots of space in that high end, sometimes perhaps a bit too sweet, but that could be the fact that I have an Ortofon 2M Blue cartridge on my turntable now, and those are kind of notorious for making records sound a little brighter than they are. The mid-range for this is adequate, but it could use a bit more heat to it, and so this one's maybe lacking a little bit in that way. Overall, good dynamic range. The original pressings by DJM and MCA overall tend to be quieter than I think the album really should be. I think, especially with this one, though the dynamic range is good, overall volume-wise, everything could have been brought up a level or two. There are other pressings that kind of make up for that. So again, 8.5 out of 10 for the sound quality of this. Next one is another UK 1975 first series DJM copy, DJ LPX1, but it was not pressed by Pi. It was cut by, lacquers were cut by Aaron Chakravarty. The lacquer numbers are a bit different here. You have on side 1 or side A, it's an A1 lacquer, but on side B, it's a B4 lacquer. And as I said, Aaron Chakravarty cut both sides. This is the copy, by the way, that you saw very briefly in an earlier video, maybe a couple months ago, and I was going through that melt crate back there, and I said, well, I have a mystery copy of Tumbleweed that I'll talk about in a future episode, but there was also a Captain Fantastic copy, and I said, this is a bit of a mystery copy. This is that copy, and here's the mystery. Though it's clearly a first series UK DJM, was mastered by Aaron Chakravarty, has all the indicators and the matrices. It has a pressing ring, okay, that is unmistakably a CBS Aston Clinton pressing plant pressing ring. And that maybe shouldn't surprise anyone, because after DJM UK switched distributors on July 1st, 1976 from Pi to CBS UK, that was the plant that pressed a lot of Elton's records on the DJM label in the UK. But here's the mystery. When I hold this up to a strong light, it glows a translucent, a deep amber rose. And I'm not aware of any other plant in the UK that used that exact same vinyl compound. So I'm thinking, well, maybe it was pressed at Pi, but I can't find any evidence of Pi Records changing their machines, their equipment in the mid-70s. This was most certainly pressed at Aston Clinton, but it uses the vinyl compound from Pi. And who knows, maybe that was part of the, in other words, it's a contract pressing. This is my theory anyway. It was a contract pressing, probably because the album was so popular, and DJM and Pi specifically could not keep up with it. And maybe part of the deal was, can you make us some more copies? We'll supply you with the extra vinyl compound. I don't know. It can't be a second series DJM, because the second series Captain Fantastics okay, were distributed in the UK by CBS, but they weren't actually pressed in the UK. They were actually done in Holland for the UK. I don't know why, but the first, second series DJM Captain Fantastics were done offshore, done in Holland, and the lacquers were cut by Ian Cooper, not Aaron Shocker Verdi. So anyway, I got this copy via Discogs from the Revolver Record Shop in Southend-on-Sea, Essex, UK. Sound quality. Yeah, sound quality is pretty much the first copy. I give it an 8.5 out of 10, excellent. Even having been pressed somewhere else, and even with the B4 lacquer stamper number, it sounds virtually identical to the A1B1 copy, the first copy I showed you, which was pressed by Pi. Next copy you have seen before. It's the 1978 UK DJM Picture Disc Edition, DJV 23,000. I did a separate episode, a showcase short about this last fall. I unboxed it. I won't spend a lot of time talking about this copy because I've talked about it a lot. This copy may have, although the documented provenance is a little shaky at best, may have belonged to John Reed at one point. The lacquers were cut by Strawberry Mastering, which was a boutique mastering setup that began in the Westminster part of London in the late 70s, I think it was 78. So even though it's a picture disc, and picture discs, are, especially from the 70s, are notorious for having bad sound, it was at least pressed from stampers that were themselves derived from really well-cut lacquers. What's the sound quality of this one? I couldn't tell you because it's a picture disc, and I don't play picture discs because I'm a classy person. No, I just don't, because they're, to me, they're not, you don't buy picture discs for playing. You buy them, they're collectibles, really. Okay, so the next one is 1975 German DJM copy. Okay, so German DJM 2407-101 was its catalog number, and it was manufactured in Germany by Phonodisc. And this one I featured in an earlier video. I think it was back in February, where I was opening a box on the floor. It's the same one where there was an early copy of The Captain and the Kid. Okay, so I got this in January, February of this year via a Discogs seller in Portugal. And the lacquers were cut in the LP press by Phonodisc in Germany. The sound quality for this is quite, I don't want to say, it's not bad, it's not great, it's kind of in the middle. I'd say maybe 7.75 out of 10. High end, not quite as sweet or clear as the original UK DJM pressing. The low end or bass on this kind of seems boosted, perhaps a bit too strong. And when I say boosted, it's not in a way that makes the low end sound tight or punchy, but really kind of like boomy, very kind of loose, which I don't like. I don't think is good. The mid-range, however, is well done. It has that heat, that snap to it that I want for the middle range, that bite that I think the guitarists need. It's just a shame about the low end on this one. Otherwise, it's a really good sounding pressing. Okay, the next one is Japanese. 1975 first Japanese DJM with the Obi. Okay, catalog number IFS 80217, and it was manufactured in 1975 by Toshiba EMI in Tokyo. I actually have 3 copies of this. I got 2 of them, including the one in my hands, from my friend Michael. And that's my friend Michael of Kings Island. The copy without the Obi, which is this copy here, I got myself at a record show in Hamilton, Ontario back in 2023. Anyway, this copy here has the poster and 2 booklets. And it actually has an extra booklet, which I think I may have shown before. That's it there. This is the Japanese lyric booklet. Has some extra images in it. Okay, so this was cut, plated, and pressed in Japan by Toshiba EMI. Sound quality is actually really good. I'd say it's excellent. I give it a 9.25 out of 10. I don't usually like Japanese pressings, vinyl pressings pre-1980s, but this one is an exception. There's none of that low-end roll-off that 1970s Japanese pressings are kind of famous for. The EQ styling of this one is basically the same as the original UK DJM, But I find the mid-range and the high-end on the Japanese copy, they both have a sort of extra crispness to them, a slight kind of snap that, again, for that middle range, I can really, you can hear it in some of the guitars, but also in the vocals on this one. It's kind of like the sonic equivalent of biting into a fresh apple. That's what this is, the Japanese. And the next one is the 1980 Japanese 1981 DJM-7Cs reissue, catalog number K22P210, manufactured by King Records. I actually have 2 copies of this. It's a reissue, so the sleeve has no gatefold. It's just a standard single pouch sleeve. It was part of a 1981 reissue series by DJM Japan and 7Cs, the label. The 7Cs was, as it turns out, a label that was owned by the manufacturing company, King Records of Japan. This version of Captain Fantastic is not the same as the 1975. It's all new remaster, new lacquers, new stampers, everything. So a new cut, plated and pressed by King Records. And the sound quality overall of this 7Cs reissue, 9.8 out of 10, which on my scale is what I call beyond excellent or super duper. The EQing of this copy is among the very best of any vinyl copy of Captain Fantastic I have in my collection. The low end is really warm and punchy and tight and clear. The mid-range is very, very hot and snappy, and the high end has the clarity and just the right amount of sweetness. It loses a fraction of a point because, unfortunately, the last 2 minutes, minute and a half, 2 minutes or so of each side, there's that sort of inner groove distortion issue. The volume goes down and things sound a little woolly, a little fuzzy. But I think that could have been avoided because I don't have too many other vinyl copies that have that problem. So it's a bit of a shame. Otherwise, this is just a really, really good sounding vinyl copy of Captain Fantastic. Oh, seems I lied. There is a booklet. Yeah, it's a bilingual English-Japanese lyric booklet. I don't know if the other copy has one, but this copy does. So, all right, the next vinyl copy is from South Africa, the 1975 South African DJM ML4016 was its catalog number. It was pressed by the Gallo Company, which was a South African vinyl record manufacturer. I did a video about this exact copy last fall. Remember, it's the one with the censored sleeve. See the silver bikini on the lady there? On all other copies, she's bare naked, but on the South African one, they had to cover up with a bikini and airbrush out other lady parts on the sleeve. It has a gatefold sleeve. It's kind of a floppy sleeve, but it's I think a well-printed, well-made sleeve. But no poster, no booklets. Instead, you got lyrics on this kind of orangey red lyric sheet, which was exclusive to the South African issue. And yeah, sound quality wise, both sides were cut by Aaron Chakravarty, or at least both sides, the lacquers were signed Aaron, A-R-U-N, which was his kind of signature. Although the lacquers for this were done by the great Aaron Chakravarty, overall I find the quality conspicuously lower on every level. It's not bad, but it's almost as if this was pressed from inferior metalwork. I don't know, that's just a theory, I'm just speculating. It seems to me like everything was kind of brought down a level in some way for some reason. It has to be something to do with the production chain that this went through. Okay, so that's the South African copy. This is the US 1975 USMCA limited edition brown vinyl. Fantastic, and signed by both Elton and Bernie. And there are the signatures there. I did a whole episode about this back in January. I think it was the second episode on this channel I did in 2025. This was a special gift from my buddy and fellow Elton collector, Alfonso. So it was limited edition, limited to 2,000 copies, was it? Yeah, 2,000 personally autographed copies, and they were circulated a number of different ways, but all promotionally. These could not be sold in stores. And Even though it's brown vinyl, incidentally, it's just basically a brown vinyl standard pressing, standard as in the lacquers were cut at MCA Studios in Universal City, California by Brian Inglesby. His initials BDI are in the runouts, and was plated and pressed at Gloversville. So it's basically just a Gloversville copy, pressed in brown vinyl, then signed by Elton and Bernie. What's the sound quality like? I don't know. I won't play it. Oh yeah, the other thing, sorry, I forgot to mention. The other thing is you're probably wondering what that is. That's a letter of provenance. Well, if you, again, go watch the episode, there's a very small chance that this very copy once belonged to John Lennon. I wouldn't bet on it, though. That's the provenance. The provenance is shaky on just about every level. Okay, so that's the brown vinyl, USMCA. Next one is just a standard black vinyl USMCA Gloversville pressing. And I featured this copy too in an episode last fall. I think it was the Elton Safari episode when I was on Long Island, because I got this at Infinity Records in Massapequa Park, New York, on Long Island. Now it has the inserts, the booklets, the poster. There isn't room here to open up posters, but something that took me years to realize is that the MCA posters were actually, once unfolded, were almost a full third smaller in size than the posters that were included in the DJM copies, not just in the UK, but in a lot of DJM territories, the poster was just bigger. Anyway, this is, like I said, a Gloversville pressing. Lacquers cut at MCA, also cut by Brian Inglesby, so BDI are the initials in the runouts. In the 1970s, MCA, it was well known, and not in a good way, for having employed some of the best mastering engineers in the business. So, you know, Brian Inglesby is a great example, but also people like Daryl Johnson, Larry Bowden, and even later on, people like Steve Hoffman and Kevin Gray. But then MCA in the 70s and then into the 80s, MCA would, despite having that tremendous advantage, would turn around and press its stock on some of the noisiest, lowest grade vinyl available in the United States. And so often, you know, I can hear what seems to me like a really, really good mastering, but I have to play it on crap vinyl. Nevertheless, I rate this one, sound quality wise, 8.5 out of 10. So very, very good. The low end is warm and rich and punchy without sounding boosted. The mid-range is very excellent. It has good heat to it, good snap to it. The high end could have been better. It seems not terribly rolled off, but Elton sounds almost like he's singing behind like a thin curtain or something. It just doesn't, the high end on this MCA copy just doesn't have the same presence that the DJM copies, particularly the UK and the Japanese DJM copies, have. And that's possibly a consequence of MCA engineers having to work with not the original album master that would have been in the UK at the time, but a copy tape as a source. And next, this is probably it's one of my two. I have two MCA Pinckneyvilles. I got one copy from Michael, the one that the record which is in better shape, which is this one, and the other I got a couple years ago via a Discog seller in Chicago. So Pinckneyville, just like the Gloversville, lacquers cut by Brian Inglesby at MCA, plated and pressed by MCA Pinckneyville. Sound quality wise, exactly the same as in every way as the Gloversville copy, exactly. Which is interesting because in the past, I have detected sound quality differences between USMCA Gloversville pressings and USMCA Pinckneyville pressings of different albums. And these are cases where everything else is more or less the same, okay, except for which one of the two USMCA plants did the plating and the pressing. But in this case, to my ears and on my stereo, they sound exactly the same. Next is, I have two of these. This is another USMCA copy, but it's and it's MCA 2142, but it's one of a run of contract copies done by PRC in Richmond, Indiana. PRC was short for Philips Philips Record Company. I wager that they were probably pressed circa 1975-76. The lacquer's unsigned, so there's no BDI, no indication that it's Brian Inglesby that cut it. But the scribing style is exactly the same. I don't want to assume, but if I had to bet, I would say that the lacquers for these PRC contract copies were done by Brian Inglesby at MCA, but the plates were made by PRC Richmond, and then the LPs were pressed there. Sound quality is exactly the same as the other two US MCA copies. The only difference that I can tell with this PRC Richmond contract pressing was that it was pressed on slightly quieter vinyl, but even then I wouldn't say the quality of the vinyl was that much better, so not really that much of an improvement. What's interesting about the PRC Richmond contract copies was that a lot of them turned up in Canada. And I don't know this for sure, but what evidence does exist would strongly suggest that MCA Canada imported many of these PRC Richmond contract copies from the US into Canada, probably in late 75, and maybe even for a while in early 1976. And the reason for that was because in the first week of August 1975, all the workers at MCA Records, only dedicated plant here in Canada, which was in Cornwall, Ontario, all the workers of that plant, in the first week of August 1975, they walked out and went on strike. And that strike lasted until February 1976, which was when MCA Records Canada decided to close their plant in Cornwall permanently. So during the summer of 1975, they would have needed stock pretty badly. Captain Fantastic was a hugely popular album up here in Canada too. And maybe there just wasn't time for them to look for, contract copies done somewhere else. It was maybe just easier for them to import the PRC contract copies up from the States and use those as Canadian stock. It's my theory only, I don't know that for sure, but there were some Canadian MCA copies of the album pressed at MCA Cornwall in those early months before the strike. So between April and July 1975. They're not difficult to find, but they're not terribly easy to find either. And I have one. Actually, I think it's the next copy. Oh, this is my second PRC Richmond copy. This is the MCA Canada. It's MCA 2142, pressed at MCA Cornwall, but with metalwork, okay, sent north from MCA Gloversville, which was typical. This isn't time to get into it, but I've mentioned in earlier videos where for Canadian copies, MCA Cornwall never did their own, not for the Elton John records anyway, never did their own metalwork. They always got metal masters sent north from MCA Gloversville. So this Canadian copy was based on lacquers cut by Brian Inglesby at MCA in Universal City. Now the sound quality for this one is, believe it or not, and I can't understand how this can be, but just hear me out. I give it an 8.75 out of 10. The EQing sounds exactly the same as all the American MCA copies that I just talked about here, just reviewed. But the vinyl quality of this Canadian one is a little better, even better perhaps than the US PRC Richmond contract copies. But for some reason, remember I said earlier that the mastering, the Inglesby mastering is great, but it sounds like, Elton singing from behind some kind of thin curtain. That's not here. That's not on this copy. So for some reason, the high end is slightly better. I'm not sure how that's possible, but to my ears and on my stereo, my original Canadian MCA copy, for some reason, just sounds slightly better. Okay, last but certainly not least, this is the 2016 Mercury Records reissue, okay, a remaster and reissue, catalog number 5707090, and it was pressed by Optimal in Germany. Now this edition was first issued in late 2016 in the United States as part of that Burberry, or Burberry, how do you pronounce that? I don't know. That box set that you could get. It was a very limited release in late 2016. And then the following spring, in April 2017, those titles were sort of given a wider release on vinyl. I bought this in May 2017. It was one of the first two of the 2016-17 Mercury vinyl reissues that I bought. And I got this in Barnes & Noble in Atlanta. And it was the Cumberland location, just off the Cobb Highway. I don't know about now, but back then, a good chunk of that stores, upper level, was music and movies. I got a lot of great stuff there at that Barnes & Noble in Atlanta, including the Madman vinyl remaster, and probably my best reissue copy of the Velvet Underground Nico album, too. So the packaging was novel in that it reproduced exactly the original DJM issue. We have a gatefold sleeve. It comes with exact replica copies of the original 2 booklets and the poster. And the poster is the same size as the original DJM posters from 1975. The earliest copies of this 2016-2017 remaster had yellow stickers on them that claimed that they'd been remastered from the original analog tapes. And although I'm sure that's true on some level, I doubt that these were mastered directly from the original 1975 master tapes. Before their lacquers were cut by Sean McGee at Abbey Road Studios, these 2016-17 reissues were remastered at Gateway Mastering by Bob Ludwig, who for most of the last 15-20 years at least has done most of his mastering work using high-res digital sources and using high-res digital generally. Rarely, if ever, does he master in pure analog anymore. He's not against it, but it's rare that he does. So Universal never actually said that it was, AAA or pure analog, and I have a feeling that if they were, Universal really would have pushed that as a sort of a selling point for this series. But they never said that. I guess we'll never know for sure, but as long as Universal doesn't claim that this remastered edition was pure analog, then there'll always be room for doubt that these were all analog remasters. In any event, this was pressed at Optimal in Germany. Sound quality wise, I give it on my 10-point scale a 9.75. Another beyond excellent copy. And I know that I'm not supposed to say that, okay? Because it's not all analog. Like I said before, the chances are very strong it's digitally sourced. And I'm sure there are people out there that would swear, oh, I can hear digital in the chain. Oh, my poor ears. Get over it, okay? The EQ styling is very, very similar to the 1981 7C's Japanese remaster, but this 2016-17 remaster doesn't have the inner groove distortion problems on the last 2 minutes on either side. Now, volume-wise, it is actually louder than any other vinyl copy I have, but without being too loud. The dynamic range isn't quite as good as that of the best of my vintage vinyl copies. On this one, you can hear, you can sense the compression, but it's not too much. And overall, it's just a very warm, beautiful sounding cut of the Captain Fantastic album. So I would have to say, if I had to rank like my top 3 vinyl copies, this one would probably be number one, and then the 1981 Japanese 7C's reissue would be number 2, and then number 3 might be the original 1975 Japanese by Toshiba. That concludes part 1. The Captain Fantastic vinyl deep dive. In the next episode, I'm going to do a Captain Fantastic CD deep dive. It won't be as long as this because I have fewer CDs, but once again, happy anniversary, 50th anniversary to Captain Fantastic. It's just a gorgeous album. Will always be one of my favorites by any artist. Remember to click like on this video and consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching.